Good evening, everyone. It is so fantastic to see all of you. My name is Carrie Miller, and I am the site director of NYU in Washington, D.C. And on behalf of our faculty, students, staff, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the NYU DC Academic Center for an evening that we've all been waiting for of rich conversation with our distinguished guest, Maegan Vazquez and Professor Deb Willis. But before I introduce our guest, I want to thank some very important groups and individuals for bringing this program together. First, a warm, heartfelt thank you to Tom McIntyre and the NYU Brademas Center and our Government Affairs Office for their continued support, programming, and partnership. And thank you for our outstanding event team, staff and students, Iju, Nora Bustani, and Margaret Charnick. And of course, thank you to NYU's incredible Center for Black Visual Culture and the Tisch School of the Arts Photography and Imaging Department. So this evening, we have the pleasure of having our conversation moderated by Ms. Maegan Vazquez. Since 2023, Maegan Vazquez has been a reporter with the Washington Post National Politics Breaking News team. And prior to joining the Post, for 5 years, she was at CNN writing for CNN.com, first as breaking news reporter and then as White House reporter. Maegan grew up in Laredo, Texas, went on to NYU, where she earned a BA in journalism and social and cultural analysis, and is now a resident of Washington, D.C. Could you please join me in welcoming our moderator, Maegan? And now I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce to you our celebrated guest of honor, Dr. Deborah Willis, University Professor and Chair of the Department of Photography and Imaging at the Tisch School of the Arts at NYU. She is also the founding director of NYU's Center for Black Visual Culture, and her research examines photography's multifaceted histories, visual culture, contemporary women photographers, and beauty. She is the recipient of the MacArthur Fellowship, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and received the Outstanding Service Award from the Royal Photographic Society in the UK. She's also a highly esteemed member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Could you please join me in welcoming Deb Willis? Okay, so this evening, you are joining our guest in a conversation on Professor Willis's groundbreaking book, Reflections in Black, a Reframing, now released in a new 25th anniversary edition. The collection is the first comprehensive history of Black photographers and a powerful visual record of African American life. Spanning nearly 600 images, from rare antebellum daguerreotypes to iconic portraits of James VanDerZee, Gordon Parks, Carrie Mae Weems, and others, Reflection in Black challenges the caricatures and omissions of mainstream photography. Instead, it offers a moving, complex, and expansive account of Black life across centuries, from slavery and the Great Migration to the Civil Rights era and contemporary suburban life. So following their conversation, we'll have an open Q&A dialogue followed by a book signing in our atrium. Thank you both, and we look forward to the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm honored.
I am so excited for this conversation. As some of you may or may not know, this is the Changemakers series with the Brademas Center, where we speak to different changemakers in their fields and talk about their lives, their careers, and reflect on their work. So I'm so excited to talk to you today about Reflections in Black, particularly because we're at the 25th anniversary of it being published. A lot has changed in those 25 years, as we were discussing backstage. I want to hear a little bit more about some of the early days and what inspired your research and what inspired you to work on this book.
Thank you. Just want to say thank you to everyone who's here tonight. You know, it's the coldest night of the year.
Sure is.
So please warm up and we'll have warm conversations and difficult conversations, but it's truly an honor to see all of you here, and also my co-curator, Philip Brookman from the National Gallery. And just to let you know that there's another show that has DW and PB together at the National Gallery of Art, Photography in the Black Arts Movement. And so this is part of that extension of my life in DC. I started as an undergraduate student at Philadelphia College of Art in the 70s and asked the question, as all students ask, where are the black photographers? And my professor hesitated and said, I know a few, but there are black photographers, none of them were in our history books. So she suggested that I could conduct a research paper then, and that was 1974. And I wrote a proposal because I knew black photographers existed because I grew up in a beauty shop in Philadelphia. My mom had Ebony Jet, every black magazine possible, National Geographic, and Look and Life. I knew Gordon Parks existed, I knew Moneta Sleet existed, I knew Jack Franklin, who was my neighbor, who learned photography in the war. And I thought, where are the black faces? And that's how it started. I continued to, as an artist, researching was really different. You just couldn't go to the librarian and ask for a book or archive or something. So I went to the Black Press and I turned pages. I looked at the microfilm then, just looking for names and photographs. So I connected the names and the photographs. And then I went to the Schomburg Center. This is a young art student, trying to find a voice in this world. And the Schomburg had the images.
The Schomburg Center.
For Research in Black Culture, part of the New York Public Library.
So you take this up in undergrad,
Mm-hmm.
very prescient. Got to be wondering, how has nobody else done this yet? By the time you revisit this later in your career and the book gets published, tell me about what those years were like in your work.
In my world, in terms of after graduating from college.
Right.
Right. I had a professor.
Further research.
Right, right. I had a professor who, I had a wonderful woman professor, Ann Tucker, who was just a friend and worked with me through those years, creating a list, and I found 300 photographers. I had another professor who told me I was taking up a good man's space. You are sitting in this classroom. There were 18 men in the classroom and 3 women, 2 black women, 1 white woman, and he told me specifically, that all I would do is get married, get pregnant, have a baby, and a good man could have been in that seat. So I was shocked that my dream of becoming a photographer, which I wanted to when I was 10 years old, that was going to be stopped by this, horrible man. And so it was difficult to, I made photographs, I still created work, I still continued my research, but I knew that I needed to keep forward with my work. And he was right. I got married, I got pregnant, and I continued my work, and that really made me, he tried to shame me of being a woman, being a mother, being an artist, and I know so many women had that experience in art school, and they stopped making art. But I was determined to complete it, so I complete my research and make my photographs, and I went to grad school at Pratt, and then continued the work. And then one day, walking down this corridor I never walked down before at Pratt, there was a sign said photo specialist at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. And I said, oh my God, that's my job. So I applied, and it was this amazing. I met Jean Blackwell Hudson, who was a curator there since 1948. This is 1979. And Ruth Ann Stewart, who was the associate curator, and Ernest Kaiser, all of these people who knew this history. And they said, they hired me. I started January 3rd, 1980. And I worked there for 12 years and continued to try to find collections that had Black photographers and find and recategorize the images so that researchers could come in and not only look at the subject matter, but also find photographers.
So throughout all these years, you're collecting the data, doing the research, obviously have other projects in mind. Eventually, you're at the Smithsonian as curator, and that's around the time, correct me if I'm wrong, that the book publishes, right?
No, I started this at the Smithsonian in '92, that they were developing, the Smithsonian was developing an African American museum on the Mall. And it was, the project was called, the project was the National African American Museum Project. Claudine Brown was the undersecretary at the time, and she hired me to assist in looking for collections for the possible museum for the future. And so I worked there for 10 years, and while I was there, I decided to go back to school, and I worked with, readers group, the sister clubs and readers, and met so many wonderful women during this time period, and went to George Mason to study cultural studies. And that was an opportunity for me to focus on the, theory, the history, the culture of photography in a broader sense.
I just find it fascinating that this book was published in 2000, right? And there hadn't been a book about this before then. I mean, I was scratching my head. Why do you think no one else picked it up prior?
I was curious about that in 1984. I had a biobibliography that I created based on Black photographers. And then in '87, I did another project. I was looking and hoped maybe some other people, art historians, would continue the project. But publishing is hard, and people are, disappointed with publishers who turn them down. I was lucky. I had Richard Newman, who worked at Garland Publishing, and he called me up and said, "How would you like to do a book on Black photographers?" I said, "I have an undergraduate paper, an undergraduate language." He said, "Send it to me." And he said, "We can make this happen." And he worked with me, and that's where the first kind of biobibliography started. And then I decided to get another master's in art history, so that I could just kind of be able to talk about the images in different ways. I was hoping we'd find ways. There were other people who were creating other exhibitions over time. And finally, this happened.
So it seems like for some of the photographers, this was exposure in a new way through academic research that they had not necessarily dealt with before. And you talk a little bit about your approach with doing research through the Black press, which is, I don't know how many people were doing that before you to get these photographers on the map, What was the research process like for you? And were there any specific hurdles or challenges that you felt like, wow, I didn't expect to encounter this? Did anything surprise you in your research?
Oh, there were wonderful surprises. During slavery, there were many free Black photographers who created studios documenting. They were abolitionists. They were active in movements in terms of representing Black life and Black culture, but also documenting Civil War. Had no idea that there were a number of photographs that were made by Black photographers of Civil War soldiers, washerwomen. And so the surprise came out of other book projects like that I wrote about the Civil War, Blacks in the Civil War. But one surprising aspect that my son pointed out, my son Hank Willis Thomas pointed out, was that here is a time in 1840 when blacks were enslaved, that black people owned businesses, they were scientists, they were cultural leaders, but they were creating photography studios for their community. And that was surprising to see all over the country, like in Tennessee, in California, in New York, and then in the South, and then here in DC. So what I felt was really important in terms of my aha moment was to make sure that I looked for women photographers. And I looked and found some great women photographers. Like Alelia Bundles is here tonight, and we met during the same time period. She is the great-granddaughter of Madam C.J. Walker. We often looked at photographs together, and we found some of the black photographers that I located at the time, photographed, Scarlac Studio, photographed Madam C.J. Walker. R.E. Mercer photographed Alelia, her daughter. So the experience for me was how the connections of black photographers were connected to families, to businesses in that way.
So I want to ask you about those early photographs. There was a wide array of depictions of different types of people, different situations in that early post-1840 chapter. One of the things that I want to know is, what do you think was the motivation behind documenting what these black photographers documented in those early days? And what can we learn from it?
The photographs were evidence of pride, evidence of representation, evidence of community building. And that's what I thought was really important, that some of these black towns were made, were created. And the archives are lost because, the photographs didn't exist. But they're discovering them now. And so at that time, when the photographers were making photographs, like Richard Roberts in Columbia, South Carolina, he drove his family of 6 to 9 children on day trips to document some of the families in these areas of South Carolina that didn't have photography studios. So photography was important for family members to share, to also send to people who migrated to the north, but also fashion was important. And the idea of how a lot of women were designing clothes, and they had an opportunity to have their church ladies or other people in their families pose with their designs. And so that was also helpful in my sense of recreating this story, reframing this history of black culture.
Do you think that the introduction of photography changed public perceptions or mass depictions of African Americans? Do you feel like that was sort of a cognizant push by those early black photographers?
Yeah, because the images were daunting by some white photographers. Some racist images of black culture, were viewed as lazy, unattractive. And these black photographers who fought back in terms of how do we find justice in images. And we find justice through standing in front of the photographer's studio to tell stories. There were many blacks who left this country, moving to Liberia, moving out of the country, moving back to the Caribbean, based on the racist experiences they found. There were images with, children eating chicken or chasing chicken or eating watermelon. And there were the images that circulated widely, in Europe, also in World's Fairs. These images were there. That we had public human display of images of people who represented the sense of othered people, in terms of those human displays, and not as representation of human beings.
as a chronology of their actual lives, especially in the United States, right?
Yes.
So I want to move a little bit forward past those early days. Can you talk to me a little bit about how technology and photographic processes evolved over the 20th century and how that influenced Black photography?
Yeah, there was the different cameras that were used, like the Rolleiflex and the Graflex that T.D. Harris used. He was a Pittsburgh photographer. He worked for the Pittsburgh Courier. Gordon Parks used the Leica and other large format cameras in the 30s and 40s. They were handheld cameras, but they also used large format cameras to make portraits. But with the faster films and the cameras that were used, that T.D. Harris was known as one shot. He did not waste his film or his lighting on a lot of images like Gordon Parks. As one photographer, Robert McNeil, dear man, said to me, he first met Gordon Parks and he was like shooting all these bulbs and lying on the floor making images. And he said, "Was this guy crazy? What about all these bulbs? We need these bulbs." But we know that it was a business. And T.D. Harris was known as one shot because all of his images were one shot, one image, and it just told the whole story of an experience. And so I think that's what happened. And then color photography, created another sense of work with the magazines. When we think of publications, magazines, with Moneta Sleet working for Ebony and Johnson Publishing. And so that also created another level of photography where Blacks would have a chance to look at these magazines and have a desire to own some of those homes of the Hollywood people, like they have Sammy Davis Jr. and all of these famous people. And so color photography. But a lot of women also hand-tinted photographs for their husbands in the studio. So the collaboration also worked in that sense. And then we move forward to, with the civil rights movement, and a number of Black photographers were hired by white press to go into the community to document rebellions and to document some of the voter rights and registration rights with SNCC and others.
So the subject matter changes as well.
Yes.
And the environments in which they're in break out of the studio as well.
Mm-hmm.
So beyond that, I did want to ask you about, in the book, you talk about how photographs could encourage future generations to re-examine the past with a more discerning eye. And sometimes, when I was reading through the book and I was looking at these images, there's no doubt that we look through these through the lens of it being an archive, something that's been preserved for a long time. A lot of the credit to you for digging that up. Do you think that these photographers, somebody in the news industry, we churn through photography day in, day out. It's almost ephemeral. Here this day, gone the next. It's in the trash, right? Newspaper. I do wonder, do you think that these photographers, especially in those early days, had a real sense of the history that they were capturing and the fact that this imagery would be seen beyond their days? Do you think they had a real sense of that, especially in those early days of photographic creation?
Yes, because I can name a few, I can name numbers. The Scarlett Studio, they preserved all of their negatives and prints. They knew that the photographs were made not only for now, but for a future, and for a future archive, and for people to reflect on this history. Richard S. Roberts in Columbia, South Carolina, stored all of his photographs under his home, and in this
Whoa.
kind of moist place, but found ways to keep the images, the negatives dry. And Johnson, who was a professor at the University of South Carolina, was doing a project about Black life in the 80s, and the family said, "Oh yes, we have glass plate negatives. We have printed images, and then they were pulling them out. So the fact that the photographers made these images, they knew how important the work that they were creating. Morgan and Marvin Smith, when they worked in Harlem, they were heartbroken that they could not get anyone interested in their archive. They were so heartbroken that they threw hundreds of negatives out the back window of the Apollo Theater. And
It's really dramatic.
very dramatic, because they had their studio there. They photographed every important figure and every community member in that community in Harlem. And they broke my heart. But then I said, but do you have any that you saved that you didn't throw out? Because they were ABC and CBS cameramen as well as soundmen. So they understood it as well. So they invited me to their home, and then I found all of these images that they did not throw out, and they presented it to the Schomburg. And that was just fantastic that we saved that. But number of the photographers believed in the future of their images.
You talked about it earlier. I was wondering if you could hone in a little bit on the function of the photographer and the photographer studio as being in service to the community. What did that mean in practice?
In practice, it was a location where people could dream. The photographer studio, as Alan Trottenberg said, was a theater of desire. I totally agree with that. Because we could, if they didn't have the clothes, the photographers had the clothes available. If they had the clothes, they walked in, and this is their wedding dress or their grandmother's treasured piece, so that they were able to, think about World War II. How many, and go back to the Civil War, how many black photographers, before they left to go to war, they visited the photographer studio. And so it became a community place that was holistic in a sense, and biblical in a sense, because many of them did not return. So the only images that their families held on to was the family images that were made in the photographer studio.
And so where do you talk about, this aspiration and what you get to be and this space where you get to dream. When we're talking about Black photography in particular, where's that line between documentation and chronicling? And
for that second, look at this image here, Ernest Withers. He documented, too bad it's gone, but you all know that image of the strike, the washerman strike, the garbage men strike. I Am a Man, that this image, my son grew up with this image in my house. Mom, why do we have people we don't know on the walls in our house? I never thought about that. It was not something that, he says, I know that they're a man. Why are they holding these images up? I am a man. And so there's a woman right here on the edge of this image. And she's the one who organized this event, so that they could be photographed. And unfortunately, this is when Dr. King was killed at this in Memphis, Tennessee. But Ernest Withers also photographed what it meant for the two men who died during because of this protests and the strike. Two men who died, picking up garbage. And then here's a woman that he photographed, Reese Hunter Malone, who had her first registration card. How happy she was. She had a choice that she could vote for her community, because she had to take citizenship classes. Beauty shops were used as spaces where they could take classes. And that's Tiffany Gill, a historian at Rutgers, said that beauty shops were subversive spaces, and that women could have an education in the beauty shop. But just her pride, I just find this fascinating. And we think about the question. I didn't want to cut you off, but you were on that same.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We can move forward.
It's been 25 years since the initial publication of the book. What's in the new version? Tell me about the new version, and why did you want to revisit it?
I can tell you it was Sue Ross in Atlanta, Georgia, called me and said, I tried to find Reflections in Black and on Amazon, and they're selling it for $600.
Yikes.
And how I can't afford these, and I really want. Have you thought about doing a new book? And this is Maud Salter.
I was going to ask you about the new cover image.
She is. She was an artist. She unfortunately died some few years ago. Scottish descent, and she's holding a daguerreotype case, and she's seen as Calliope. So I see that a number of artists were looking at literature, they were looking at migration stories, they were looking at social change in terms of climate change, and everyday moments. This is Devin Allen in Baltimore. Barbershops during a time of photographing images in the community. So what I thought was important is to listen to the works of the contemporary photographers. What are they looking at in their communities at a time when he was photographing women who were having babies in their homes in the 40s. Thomas Askew was photographing in 1900, community in Atlanta, Georgia, and his work was on display at the Paris Exposition. And then as Zalika is photographing her great aunt's home and a place where she could rest, where her family actually creates a quilt on her sofa. So the images are thinking about the past, thinking about the future. James Presley Ball was the first Black photographer that I found and wanted to create a space for his story. And this is what I wanted to do with the contemporary photographers, finding their stories and creating a space for their stories where they're looking at different stories to explore in their works.
So between 2000 and 2025, a lot of things have changed. Mm-hmm. Primarily, I think about the thing that's things that are on the back of everybody's phone, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody has access to a very nice camera now. I wanted to ask you, how has this shift in technology, this rapid evolution of technology, changed the way that you're thinking about your research and practice?
Well, some of these photographs, like Cornelius Batty taught photography in Tuskegee in 1915, 1917. But the photographs circulated in Tuskegee, in Bordeaux as well. Photographs circulated in the 19-teens in the communities. So the photographs became their Instagram moment during that time. That they were there documenting a public speaker, and they have their hats, their dress, their style. Here's Bonita Bing here in DC, and she's photographing marching bands. And so what I felt was important with people who migrated from the Caribbean, what they're working on in 19th century processes to tell stories about migration and residency, what Kwame Brathwaite is photographing in Harlem, beauty in the 1960s and a protest in front of a wig shop where people should not wear wigs and wear natural hair. So the conflict in communities basically developed through this time period, and that's what's happening now when we see Instagram images where people are representing themselves. Black beauty was never discussed in the white press. So the Black is Beautiful movement became really important. James Brown, I'm Black and I'm beautiful, I'm Black and I'm proud. All of this is happening, in photography, but it's happening now. And it's happening now. We were channeling Prince.
I love it.
But it's happening now with Instagram because women are making self-portraits, men, everyone's making a self-portrait and representing themselves. This is how I want to be seen. I want to be believed in my future. I see myself in different ways. But the archive of beauty is central, like this. This is during COVID. Her father is photographing, cutting her hair. This is Faith Davis, Charles Davis. Just Black people couldn't swim in public pools. So what it means to document the freedom and play. how do we think about play during that time? And now we see it on Instagram all the time. People are playing, they're playing music, they're experimenting. And I think that that's the, quote, hope of Instagram. But then also the archive that I'm experiencing is seeing, jazz musicians. As I mentioned to you earlier, I saw a photograph of Josephine Baker meeting Marian Anderson. And they're both respectfully looking at each other, and they're smiling, and they were in awe. And just to think about that connection. And I want to know where he's finding these photographs. I'd love to be in touch with him, which I have written to him to say, it's a great archive.
In some ways, do you feel like there's an oversaturation? Does it make your job harder at all?
No, because I want to make photographs. I'm doing a lot of work for other photographers, but I don't oversaturate yet, because this is Stephen Cummings right here on the first row, He is like creating self-portraits about moments in Black history, and he's placing his Black male body in these spaces. So no, I don't feel it's oversaturation, because I have students. I have mothers and parents asking how will their child survive in this climate. And so as we talked about hope.
Yeah, journalism, I have a lot of those questions too.
Right.
A lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
So looking forward,
Mm-hmm.
what are the trends that you're observing in Black photography? Where do you see things going? And do you have any anxieties about AI?
Yeah, I had my first AI moment. My son made everyone knows I had knee surgery. So my son took a photograph of me over Thanksgiving weekend. We were sitting, with the kids talking, and next thing I know, I'm up dancing, kicking my leg, doing all these things. I'm like, Hank, what is this? Because I was actually seated. He said to AI, animate this photograph. I'm not dancing. I'm not kicking my leg up, and that was frightening.
Yeah.
It's like fake imagery.
Yeah. It's not the aspirational self.
That's not the aspirational. I will be kicking my leg up soon, but the fact is it was frightening to see. Mm-hmm. And he said, you have to start teaching this in the classroom. We need to talk about, these fake images. But I had never experienced that in my life. I was like, my arms were spread, racing. And so I am concerned. Mm-hmm.
Well, on a lighter note, where do you see the future of Black photography heading? What are the trends that you're observing outside of AI? That
it's going to continue. That the photographers are going to continue to make images. They're also going to continue to make images about beauty, about home, about climate change. And they're not only going to make documentary photographs, they're going to make art photographs. And they're continuing to do it. I was just at Art Basel, and there were a number of photographers who were making work. They didn't know if anyone was going to buy their work or had hope that they would buy, but there were moments that I walked in some spaces and I just see that these young photographers believe that they have a future in this field. And I'm encouraged by it. I continue to believe I have a future in the field as a photographer. So
that's my final question. We're coming up on time? Okay. That's my final question is, what's inspiring you in your practice right now?
I photograph in beauty shops. And the moments when I think about the history of subversive spaces, and I think about the history of my childhood growing up in a beauty shop, I still want to continue the stories that are told by women in beauty shops who need to relax, to need to exhale, to need to believe in what it means to raise a child and ask another woman another question. Just so I'm finding that space as a solace, a place of solace, but I want to continue to make photographs of it. I'm hoping that people will be interested in it.
Yeah, Deb, we're interested.
Right. Yeah, and just also to find a place where, there are, in terms of social practice, where I photographed a young woman who was formerly incarcerated. Her name was Faith, and she tattooed Faith on her hands. And then she said that when she was released and she moved back to Philadelphia, there were no places for women to go. There were no places for them to find support. And so she worked with the community and bringing people back together. And it happens, in tattoo parlors, in beauty shops, and things like that. So I want to document these sense of how do we deal with images of people who return, but also people who go to church every Sunday and they go to the beauty shop on Saturday. So I want to continue to find beauty in the work that I'm doing.
And on that note, I think it's time for questions. We have time for about 3 questions. I see one in the back. I see 2 in the back. Do you want to? Yeah.
Good evening, ladies. Dr. Deb, could you just point out?
Can you say your name?
Oh, Marty Williams.
Okay.
Could you point out the photographers that are in the book that are here?
Can you all stand who are here that's in the book, or whose family have worked in the book? Thank you. So Griff Davis, would you want to say something about this? Introduce?
My father was Griff Davis.
Can you stand so people can see you?
Yes.
Yeah, thank
Oh, Lord.
Right.
Okay. My father was Griff Davis. He was an internationally recognized photographer, journalist, and U.S. Foreign Service officer during the independence movement in Africa and simultaneously the civil rights movement. He was the first roving editor for Ebony at the recommendation of Langston Hughes, and he lived with Langston Hughes. And Deb, when you were talking about the bibliography, I think I remember him
I met your father
working
then.
with you on
Yeah,
that.
that's when I met him in
And then
Atlanta.
I met you, frankly, when you were working on the first version of this.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Your dad was
really great.
special to me. And then here's Stephen. And any other family members who lent photographs for the book? Any other families that left, or collections that left curators who lent photographs? Everybody's shy now. I see some people.
Well, I just want to say I want to thank Deb for having me in her book. I was in the first book too, and I always tell the story about Deb. It was like 1994. I just got married. I was taking pictures, and Deb hired me to do this photograph job of the Howard Artist Scholar, and she didn't tell me she was going to pay me. The check came in. It was $5,000. And me and my wife just got married in the backyard. I said, oh my God, I can't believe it. I'm a photographer now, so I thank Deb for that. Yeah.
Okay, there's a question. Alelia? Okay.
So I'm Alelia Bundles. So Deb, I wanted you to talk a little bit about Hank and how, when you said that he saw I Am a Man, and how his practice evolved from that.
I think his memory of collecting over the time period, but his work, he attended Duke Ellington High School. He was originally interested in, he was at another private school that I couldn't afford. And we changed to Duke Ellington High School, which was the best experience of his life. And he studied museum studies. Is Marta Stewart here? He studied in museum studies. And he also had one of his first exhibitions at the Smithsonian American Art Museum because he was an intern there. And so he constantly was making images, but as a child, when he was my 5, 6 years old, he would visit my mother's house, his grandmother's house, and rearrange the family album because he wanted to know who was this person and why are they in color and why are they in black and white. And he wanted to arrange and change the picture album. So he was always looking at images and asking questions. But the irony of it is I placed the photographs in the family album when I was his age. And it was just amazing to learn that he became interested in working in doing that. And he started asking questions about images, and reframing different stories. And he started making images at Duke Ellington, and then I convinced him to go to NYU because it was my dream school. And he said, "Mom, I'm picking out my own school. I will apply for you, but I'm going to a campus school." And he called me 3 weeks after being at NYU. I never will forget this. I tell every parent this, that when your child says thank you, you treasure it because you don't hear it often, especially at that age. But he said, "Mom, this is the best experience of my life." 3 weeks of being at NYU. I'm in DC now and trying to make sure that he is okay. But that's where, just to have a chance to make photographs and create images and tell stories. And it has a lot to do with seeing the family album, but also seeing Black photographers on the walls and at home. And there was someone here.
Hi, how you doing? Oh, that was kind of. So.
Can you say your name?
No, I did not. My name is Jermaine. I'm a photographer, practicing photographer. And so after studying, Black photographers and photography as a subject and publishing your research, what aspects of your research would you want Black photographers to reflect upon the most when reading your book?
Believing in their images, believing in yourself, that your work has history and have importance in that sense. Like you said with some of the photographers, how did they know that there was a future? There's so many people that I meet, it breaks my heart when they don't believe in that it's hard. And they don't believe that their photographs will be seen. So I'm constantly, I'm a pain in the neck to talk about believing in self. Like I know you have to eat, you gotta do all these fancy things, and I don't have $5,000 from the Smithsonian to give anybody. So that kind of experience will happen. But just believe in the fact that to read the book, listen to some of the artist statements, write your own artist statements, kind of believing in the self. That's how I see it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Deb, this is one last
Who are you?
question. Yeah, my name is Mel Hardy. Thank you very much. But we've known you for a long time, and the earliest memories of your giving, you kind of helped to keep that dream of the museum alive, but also in community, and we are the beneficiaries of your being in community. The Juanita and I Millennium. And so I just want to give you a thank you for your personage, what you have given to so many, both in this community and globally. It's a real treasure you are. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much. It's really great to see everyone here, and you're going to wrap up?
I think that's a great way to wrap it up. I just want to say thank you to everybody so much for braving the cold to be here for this wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, Deb. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.